The views and opinions of this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers. There is substantial risk of loss in trading futures and options, which you should carefully consider prior to trading. Well, let's get a scout's perspective as the Midwest Crop Tour wrapped up this week. What was seen on the western leg of the tour? And it's always fun to get a little bit of a perspective on this from someone who is a trader and a market analyst. Ted Seifried, Zaner Ag Hedge, was on the tour, and he joins us for a conversation here on the show. Ted, I'm sure you're tired. I'm sure it was another long week on the tour, but appreciate you joining us. I hope it went well.
Yeah, it was a good tour. It wasn't oppressively hot. It was warmer than last year. It wasn't oppressively hot. It wasn't oppressively muddy, although it was muddier than last year. It was manageable, right? And yeah, no, it was good. Saw a lot of good crops. I saw a tremendous amount of rust in Nebraska and Western Iowa that I've not seen to that extent before. But this is all happening in cornfields that are very well along. It might have an effect on test weight. It still can be a little bit of a draw on yields, but not a killer, I guess, at this point. So yeah, I guess I'll start with South Dakota. South Dakota looked really good. When we go to South Dakota, we expect to see the word variability is I mean, by the end of the crop tour, I get really sick of that word. It's a word we use so often. But in South Dakota, we expect to see variability because of just how weather and how soil changes so quickly from one area to the next. And I think the surprise for me in South Dakota was the lack of that, the uniformity. I really was a very good looking crop, and it was a very good looking crop, really for everything I saw. There were some drier fields closer to Sioux Falls, but you get a little bit outside of Sioux Falls, and everything looks really quite good. And again, even, and so I think an even crop for South Dakota is a recipe for a big yield. Soybean pod counts were very impressive, and that's going to be a theme here, Jesse. Soybean pod counts aren't the be-all, end-all of a yield. In order to get soybean yield, you have to fill those pods. If you don't have the right conditions to do that, those pods get aborted and they don't make anything. So soybean pod count is a measure of potential of yield. But I think that South Dakota crop is going to get a pretty good chance to finish out well. So I think these high pod counts are going to make for a really big, very good South Dakota soybean crop. And I'm going to say that carried over into day 2 for the north, and I call it Western Nebraska. It's not Western Nebraska, but it's the western portion of the growing area of Nebraska. Very good there too, and even the dryland stuff, which that's the area of Nebraska where when you think about dryland, you think, oh no, that's not going to be very good, but actually was. So I think when we look at Nebraska as a whole, the dryland Nebraska kind of pushed the yield up this year, where a lot of years it is a drag lower on Western Nebraska, or a drag lower on the Nebraska yield, because the irrigated just kind of does its own thing. But on years that are wetter like this, Jesse, it's almost like you wish you didn't have the irrigated. You plant it differently, but also rainy years mean less sunlight. So the irrigated wasn't anything more phenomenal than it normally is. The irrigated was just the irrigated. It was fine. In fact, you could say maybe it was even off just a touch. But the dryland corn and soybeans in Nebraska really pushed higher, pushed that the Nebraska average is higher. I think Nebraska is going to have a very good corn crop that could be a little bit better than the USDA potentially. I'm curious to see with all the rust, if that holds back some test weight, maybe keeps back some of those very top end bushels. But with corn being as far along as it is, I think that's going to look that Nebraska corn yield is going to do really well. And the soybean pod counts were, wow, off the charts, really fantastic. But we were seeing a lot of disease in Nebraska soybeans as well, a lot of SDS, a lot of brown stem rot. So it is a question of do those pods translate into yield? And I don't know. I do think the Nebraska soybean yield is going to be very good, but is it going to be just outrageously good. The potential is there for outrageously good. I kind of think it falls short of that, but I do think it's going to meet the expectations of the USDA, maybe best them a little bit. So yeah, Nebraska was really good. Now, in the meantime, we're sitting here. I'm running through the West, but I am certainly listening to what's going on in the East.
Yeah.
I know Ohio was a bit of a disappointment. Indiana was a bit of a disappointment. Illinois was a major disappointment, especially for corn. Especially for corn. I do think that is going to be a drag on that national average yield. I want to hear the Eastern Iowa and Minnesota numbers tonight before I put out my sort of official yield guess at this point. But I'd say I think it's pretty safe to say that Illinois is going to be enough of a draw that it's going to be very difficult to get to that 188.8. By how much, I'm not sure. From what I saw in Iowa, still rust issues, still some soybean disease issues, but outrageously good pod counts. Corn yields were very good too. And if you have that same sort of thing happening in the East, but minus the disease, I think there's a potential that Iowa beats a USDA number, offsets the shortfall in Illinois, and I think Minnesota will do that too. My route in Minnesota today, by the way, Jesse, District 7, our car average was a 185.4 corn yield. Last year, there was a 161.9. 3-year average is a 177. So substantially better. But District 8 is, Watawan, Blue Earth, Waseca, Steele counties. These are hard-hitting counties, high production counties. And that average was a 205.5 compared to a 157.9 last year. Those were areas that had gotten a lot of flooding. And by the way, it got a lot of water late this year too, but far enough along, I think, that it's not having a bigger effect on the soybeans than the corn. But 157.8 last year, 176.4 3-year average. Wow, a 205.5 is a very big improvement on both of those numbers.
Yeah.
And soybean pod counts were massive there as well. District 7, 1,348 average for my car today. The last year number was 1,025. The 3-year average is 1,001. So over 300 pods per 3x3 plot above both those numbers. And then even better in District 8, 1,418 compared to 1,038 last year and 1,055 on the 3-year average. So, and by the way, I think the lack of disease really very clean in Minnesota, and really good soil moisture, maybe too good in some spots. But those beans, I think, will finish out very, very well. Those pods will fill. That I think is going to really help the national average soybean yield.
We've been taking a bit of a trip down Ted's X account, Twitter account here on the video feed, looking at some of the pictures, and folks can check all those out at the Ted Spread if you are on X. And so, Ted, I'll ask you this. A lot of talk, and you kind of highlighted it. There's been chatter this year that it's kind of the case of the West really holding its weight, the East not so much. Seems like that's kind of the assessment that we're getting from the tour. Would you agree?
Yeah, but I think that ends at the Mississippi River, and I think Eastern Iowa is going to really kind of help out a bit tonight. That's my thought, anyways. I don't know. Let's see the numbers, right? But yeah, I would agree with that. It's South Dakota better, Ohio worse. That's probably a scratch. Nebraska better, Indiana worse. That's probably more than a scratch in favor to Nebraska. But then Illinois was the big disappointment of the tour so far. But Nebraska will go some ways to helping that. I think Minnesota does too. And then Eastern Iowa, if I'm right, I think that helps offset. But I still don't think a 188. I'm not sure I see that out there. I think I'll give you. How about this? I'll give you a range right now. I think I'm somewhere between a 184 and a 186, or maybe let's say a 184 half and a 186 half is kind of where I'm thinking before I see the full Minnesota and Eastern Iowa numbers.
And to that, and I know we're going to talk more next week at the Farm Progress Show. You're going to be there, and we're going to chat more. So maybe we'll have a few days to digest some of this data and look at this more. But say we do pull back that national average corn yield a bit from USDA in the end, and thinking about the demand picture, you know, one would hope maybe that changes the balance sheet just enough to give us a little more price action to the upside. I think a lot of farmers would really like to see that, Ted.
Yeah, I know they would, and I would too. But I wince when you say that, and the reason for that is because with the USDA adding 545 million bushels to demand, oh man, look, I think adding the 200 million bushels to export demand is justified. I mean, we're 23% of the next marketing year's USDA's full year target. We haven't even started the marketing year yet. That's really, really good for this time of year. However, I do think that's front loaded. The Brazilian crop is yet to really hit the market, and that's going to cut into our typical export window for corn. So what we're getting now is great to see. We're going to need it, I think. But look, when you add 250 million bushels to feed and residual, when we don't have the animals out there, I mean, look at what feeder cattle market's been doing. I mean, there's reason for that. We don't have the animals out there, Jesse. So I don't know if that demand is justified. You can say, oh, well, it's in the residual category, but guess what? The residual category is there as sort of a slush bucket. So if the USDA does lower production, and even if they lower it 4 bushels an acre, I think you're still sitting at a 2 billion bushel carryover. And by the way, that's a function of those extra 2 million acres. And I very much saw that in Nebraska and the Western Corn Belt, because we were having a hard time finding soybean fields sometimes. So I think that kind of chops a leg out of the excitement or whatever in the corn market. If we're going to have an exciting market, it could be soybeans. But to get that going, we need to see that yield come in at or better off below the USDA's national average yield. And we really need to get China buying some beans here. That's the key.
And we haven't really seen that yet. So we'll have to see what happens as we move forward. Ted, again, really appreciate the time. I know folks can follow you, as I mentioned, on X. They can go to the Zaner website for information. I know you have a daily commentary, things like that. A lot of ways to get in touch with you, isn't there, Ted?
Yeah, absolutely. You can reach me directly at 312-277-0113. You can find us at the web at www.zaner.com. We got a new Zaner Ag Hedge website, which now includes Karen's newsletter. You can sign up for that as well. You can sign up for my afternoon commentary, which is a video or a voice recording. You call it and you listen to it at your leisure. And aside from that, you can find me on X. I'm at the Ted Spread. I also saw you showing some of Karen's stuff up there too. Karen Ann Braun, or K. Ann Braun. She does wonderful job on Twitter. If you're not following her, you have to.
Absolutely. You absolutely need to. You guys all do a lot of great stuff. Appreciate the insight into the tour this year. We'll talk to you again, hopefully next week at the Farm Progress Show. Ted Seifert, Zaner Ag Hedge. Thanks for joining us for a conversation. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse. I always enjoy it, man. Thanks for having me on.
Make sure to subscribe to the Market Talk YouTube channel. You can watch our latest interviews with top market analysts in the country, find bonus content, and much more. It's easy. Just go to youtube.com/@MarketTalkAg and hit the subscribe button. Or you can search for Market Talk Ag on YouTube.